Kuzu Zampo, and a very warm welcome to all the viewers who are catching us from home. I am here at the Center for Bhutan and Gross National Happiness Studies. I would like to introduce and welcome my guest, who is His Eminence Kalu Rinpoche. My first question to Rinpoche is a question that I ask all my guests when I used to host the Changchuk Shingla.
Okay.
And the question is, who is the Buddha? I did share with Rinpoche that time that my questions are not going to be hard or difficult. So if Rinpoche could share with us, who is the Buddha?
Okay. First of all, Tashdele to all of you. Buddha, from my understanding, from my limited clarity that I have, is that in a relative level, Buddha is the one that we've seen and the witness and the story, and then also the one who have achieved the enlightenment in Bodh Gaya. Yes. That's the Buddha that we know, that we see. But the real Buddha is Dhammakaya itself. That is an exemplary figure for us to follow his footstep, so that we can also achieve the ultimate happiness and enlightenment over the time.
Yes. Yes.
So that kind of understanding is probably quite important.
Yes. And Rinpoche, a follow-up on that I would like to ask is because the reason for asking this is most of us as Buddhists, you can say culturally born Buddhists or traditionally born into Buddhist families, especially here in the Himalayas. We are born into this family, and then we have the annual pujas, the chokus, we have the tsechus. But seldom do we find ourselves asking these questions. And how important do you feel, Rinpoche? Because this question, if I may go, a backstory of this question is, I had the good fortune of being in an audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and he gave a special audience to the Bhutanese population one time during the Kala Chakra empowerment. And at that point, His Holiness started the talk by saying, even spelling out the word, sang, sa, sang, ragataga, gayata, jasajje. And for me, as an audience member in that teaching, I was blown away to think that how I had spent so much of my life not even contemplating or reflecting upon the fact that who is the Buddha. And if Rinpoche can share with us that is it a practice or is it allowed in Buddhism? The reason why I ask this, in other world beliefs, there are restrictions to what you can you question who is Allah, or can you question who is Christ, or can you question who is Bhagwan? So in Buddhism, if Rinpoche can share with us that, is it a practice, is it allowed for us to question who is the Buddha?
Of course it is allowed, because even the Buddha himself, like you had an opportunity to meet with His Holiness, that you had a conversation with him, and it is a very common answer that he gives all the time throughout the social media, and when there's a big event, he says, we are the follower of the Buddha. But it doesn't mean that you have to follow blindly. You have to based on the logic, reason, as well as a spiritual progress on your own, not just questioning everything, but at the same time making a progress with the meditation, with the analytical meditation as well. That sort of approach is very much important. So, like an example, the Buddha itself, has been accumulating his positive accumulation for 3 eons, and then whether you believe that or not doesn't matter. The most important is this single lifetime, that the final lifetime, symbolically, just before reaching the enlightenment, for our eyes to believe it and to follow that example, that itself is overwhelming for an individual like ourselves. 6 years, without any consumption of any sort of food and simply meditating, But even that sort of a realized being, even that sort of a hardship and that individual had gone through, whether his name is Buddha or not, his teaching was definitely helpful. But at the same time, due to his infinite wisdom, he always says that you can always question my teachings, you should always debate, analyze, and then follow it, not blindly. Yes. Because even in the time of Buddha, there was already many religions existed.
Yes.
Not just in the 21st century, there's so many religions. Back then, there's so many religions that existed. Over the time, it dissolved, and over the time, there's a new belief and faith, come to place, throughout the society.
And Rinpoche spoke about right now about the 6-year penance that the historical Buddha Shakyamuni did. Along those lines, one thing which comes to mind is with regard to Milarepa as well, also, the amount of hardship that he had to go through. And while the very founder of Buddhism himself went through so much hardship, and Milarepa also went through hardship, we, people who are familiar or who we can call it tourists of Buddhism, and we are trying to explore Buddhism. No?
Okay.
And at that level, when you look, you always find that there is a term called the middle path.
Okay.
And while there is a deeper meaning, a more profound meaning to what Uma means and what the middle path is,
Okay.
On a very relative level, for most of us followers, we think that middle path means something in moderation, that you don't really need to go through hardship. And the Buddha himself, after his 6 years, after he was fed the kheer, I don't know if it was kheer, by the Damzepum Nikima Sujata. So after that, Buddha is famously supposed to have said that you don't need to do all those hardships. If Rinpoche could share some opinion about that, about the middle path, and what are we to understand with regard to moderation, with regard to the Buddha Dharma?
I think number one is that I will share my own experience. I will not assume on things that what I've read.
Yes.
So from my own personal experience, I think whether we live and believe in this idea of we have to be very traditional as a Buddhist practitioner, or whether we want to be very modern as a Buddhist practitioner, regardless of you have a different approach and ideas about how Buddhism should be in the 21st century, I think the most important, the middle ground, the foundation is having a sense of reflection on oneself is very much important. With the lack of reflection on oneself, with the lack of awareness on oneself, as well as renunciation. If you don't have a renunciation, and then there's no realization.
Yes.
The renunciation doesn't have to go through hardship, doesn't have to go through extreme suffering. Renunciation simply needs a clarity in your mind. When you have a more clarity as you meditate further, the renunciation and how you renounce the samsaric world happens eventually over the time. If you try to forcefully, trying to challenge yourself, trying to force yourself, that will simply exhaust you over the time. Like an example, the difference between the Milarepa and the Buddha Shakyamuni is that they have seen everything, gone through everything, and they have no illusion of the samsara whatsoever.
Yes.
They have no second opinion.
Yes.
We have a second opinion.
Yes.
That's a big gap between them and us. Like an example, the Milarepa, he have committed certain wrongdoing in a relative level, and then he had this immense remorse and guilt and regret, and due to that profound understanding of oneself wrongdoing and being sincere of their own mistake, sincere of their own wrongdoing, that is very important. Because many of us, when we say we are Buddhist practitioner, we just simply believe that reading, praying, meditating is the key to be a Buddhist practitioner. Yes, definitely that is true. But the principle is to be sincere with oneself, to be honest with oneself. Not necessarily you have to be honest to your neighbors right away, but
you
honest.
get there.
Yeah, you can get there slowly.
Yes.
But then sincerity and honesty oneself and a sense of renunciation. And then when you have a renunciation, then there's a less self-centered attitude. As there's a less self-centered attitude, there's a space to understand new realm of reality of the condition of your own state of mind. As you have that understanding of the new condition and the new reality of mind, and then you are able to understand and experience the meaning of the subtle body and the subtle mind. Yes. When you're able to understand the subtle body, subtle mind, you also understand the very existence of the illusion, and the appearance of the illusion, impact of the illusion, as you will be able to experience not just theory, not just a theory in your mind.
Yes.
And then when you're able to understand that slowly, and then whether it's the middle ground, the middle path, or whether it's a Chakchen or Dzogchen or whatever the traditional belief may be, that will eventually come in place. But in the beginning, sincerity to oneself, and then having some sort of a gap from the self-centered attitude, and sense of renunciation bit by bit, that will make a big difference, because that was the key to reach to enlightenment. Without a reflection to the samsara, without the meaning of the renunciation along with your spiritual journey, there's no enlightenment,
Vajrayana Buddhism, how is it different from so-called before the popular term was Hinayana, but then that, I believe, in the interest of being diplomatically correct, has now been changed to Theravada, and from Theravada, now I hear that it's called the basic vehicle. So, Hinayana or Theravada or basic vehicle, whatever the name is, that is the path of the individual seeker. And besides that, there is the Mahayana and Vajrayana. So, if Rinpoche could share something about what makes Vajrayana special, or is Vajrayana special?
I personally, I don't think it is special just because somebody is speaking on the behalf of the Vajrayana ideas.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
you can say it's special, you know. You can say the gold is so much valuable,
Yes.
you know, but if the person doesn't have the basic brain to function, it is absolutely meaningless.
Yes.
You know, so I think it is very much important. Like an example, it's not about just the Theravada or the Mahayana or the Vajrayana. Like the Buddha himself, we have all the manifestation of the Bodhisattva, Yidam, protectors. All these are manifestation of the Buddha himself from the state of the Dhammakaya. It's just so that in our relative level, certain Bodhisattva, they have a feminine figure. Some Bodhisattva, they have masculine figure. Some Bodhisattva, they have more passive figure or feature or appearance. And some of them, they have different arms and objects and so on. But the most important of the practice of the Vajrayana is to reduce the fixation in the ordinary level so that we can experience over the time the nature of the mind. And that is the purpose, you know. But from my understanding, like I said before, just because somebody says Vajrayana is very special doesn't make it. You know, like an example, Telupa, you know, picking up his slipper and hitting on the Narupa.
Yes.
You know, I think if you do that right now, you will get into trouble.
Yes.
You know, so trying to copy the great master's method is not really going to work. But simply considering yourself never as a teacher, but as a practitioner oneself, and seeing other person or individual as a practitioner, seeing oneself as a practitioner. Like an example, His Holiness Dalai Lama, he says, I'm a simple Buddhist monk. He's the head of the Vajrayana, Theravada, Mahayana, whatever the Buddhist school, you know, the Vajrayana, the lineage or the tradition, you name it, he's the head of that, you know. Then, still, he says, I'm a simple Buddhist monk.
Yes.
You know, he doesn't say that without reason. So even to the highest realized being has that kind of a statement and attitude. That means ourselves as a Vajrayana practitioner, whether we are in Bhutan or in Nepal or in India or in Tibet or anywhere around the world.
Yes.
You know, I think seeing oneself as an ordinary being, a practitioner, is very important, and seeing the teachings of the Lord Buddha as a different method for the different individual, rather than saying this is lower practice, this is a higher practice, and putting a hierarchy within the Lord Buddha's teaching is absolutely meaningless. Yes. Like an example, some people when they come to a Buddhist society group, they say, I've done a preliminary practice 100,000 times, I have achieved this 200,000 times. But if you look at the history of the great masters, right, who have reached the enlightenment by accumulating 100,000 times? Nobody.
Yes.
You know, that was made up over the time.
Yes.
You
As
know,
a skillful means.
As a skillful means. But it doesn't mean that it can help everybody.
Yes.
For some it is absolutely useless. It is even discouraging.
It just inflate the ego more.
Exactly. It's even discouraging. And that's why, you know, for me, you know, not counting the practice, but rather simply being with the visualization, with the meditation or the yoga practice is far more beneficial. But my faith towards Buddhism, my dedication, my devotion to the Dharma didn't change, never will be changed.
Conferences like the Vajrayana conference that Rinpoche is going to also be a part of in the coming days, how important do you feel such conferences are?
I find that very, very important.
Yes.
Because when we have a many monastic institution, it gets caught up in a hierarchical position of who says what and what they hold and who is in the position of holding what sort of responsibility, and it creates a different world in your own, and then you get cut off from the reality of what people are going through.
Yes.
What people are going through in terms of suffering. People are going through divorce, people going through depression, people go through lack of job, people go through not having enough money to pay rent.
Yes.
You know, so they go through a lot of different challenges and different difficulties. You can't tell them that everything is impermanent.
Yes.
You know, and then when they have this kind of a different social challenges, the one thing that Buddhism should do is how to decrease their stress, their anxiety, and their concern, you know, of their worldly things.
Yes.
We should help them, ease it, you know, rather than saying, that's samsara. You know, that's basically just blaming them and being irresponsible. And I think when you do this kind of a conference, you are blocking the idea of one guru is very important, but rather bringing different kind of teachers and traditions together, and also to exchange and to share their experience rather than going against each other.
Yes.
And I think that is very, very important, because if you look back in the history, so many religions, not just Buddhist, but so many different religions in the West, Middle East, and also in the Himalaya region, there has been a lot of conflict. But
one of the most major wars in
exactly
whole shared history has been for over religion.
Yes, yes. So like when the Vajrayana conference is held like that, you know, and it's not separated by what is your nationality or what is your cultural background. It is more to do with what can you offer.
Yes.
What can you offer to make other people's life a little bit better?
Yes.
You know, by giving the importance of Buddhism at the same time. You know, not just trying something new age sort of a thing.
Yes.
You know, so I find that very helpful. And that's what I've been trying to do myself as well, because I look after my meditation center around the world. It is very helpful for a certain individual who are already devoted to a Buddhist practitioner, as a Buddhist practitioner. But then in order to reach out to the ordinary working people,
Yes.
you know, who has their family life and who lives in the city or who lives in the countryside, whatever the social status may be, they need something in the middle ground where they can approach,
Yes.
where there's a less religious and cultural boundary,
Yes.
you know. And that's why, you know, to create such platform, it's very much important. It will help so many people.
Yes.
And I'm so happy to be here.
Yes. And Rinpoche, I wanted to ask you about Shangpa Kagyu.
Okay.
I hope I'm pronouncing it
Oh
correctly.
yes, please, yes, of
Yes.
course.
Because Rinpoche is known, even your predecessor,
Mm.
the late Kalu Rinpoche, was also known as, to most people, known as a Kagyu Lama.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I was doing my homework to interview Rinpoche today,
Mm-hmm.
I came across Shangpa Kagyu, and although we do hear that from Chökyi Gambobala,
Mm-hmm.
after him, the Kagyu sects, there were 8 major and
Mhm.
I think 4
Cheshi Chungje.
less. So if Rinpoche can share something about the Kagyu tradition, and especially with regard to Shangpa Kagyu for the audience members who are
Okay.
unfamiliar.
First of all the teachings that we know as a Vajrayana Buddhist is all linked with Buddha Shakyamuni when he transformed himself in the Kala Chakra.
Yes.
You know, so that is all linked to that.
Yes.
There's no such thing as, you know, something that is made up a few centuries ago.
Yes.
You know, whether we consider ourselves as a Nyingma, Sacha, Gelu, Kagyu, Chonang, Shangpa, and also here, Tupa Kagyu. You know, all of it is linked with the Buddha Shakyamuni. That's the one thing.
Yes, that's an important thing.
That's a very important thing.
Yes.
So it's not like a different agenda,
Yes,
you know,
right.
that we are going against each other or any sort of thing like
Exactly.
that. And then, of course, the Kagyu Cheshi Chungje is a separate lineage that is linked with the Gambopa and the Telopa and Naropa and Marpa, Mela, Gambopa. And then from the Gambopa lineage, and then there's a vast different lineage within the Kagyupa sect. But the Shangpa Kagyu is not really originated from the Gambopa at all.
Yes.
Shangpa Kagyu has been existed parallelly around the same time, because during the Songtsen Gampo time,
Yes.
there was a flourish of Buddhist ideas as Guru Rinpoche traveled to Tibet, and later on Guru Rinpoche also, you know, manifest himself as a Dorje Drolyo in Pardaksang.
Yes.
You know, so we have all this different manifestation of Guru Rinpoche, you know. So in the time of Guru Rinpoche, of course, there was a noble king, emperor, but then there was an age of decline
Yes.
of Buddhist teachings.
Lang Dharmas.
Yes, Lang Dharma. And then during that time, many people still seek for the spiritual path, knows about Buddhism, and the Chungpo Nanjo, he actually was a Bempo practitioner until he was 50 years old. But since he was young, he always had this prophecy. The Indian sadhu came to his home and then gave a nectar blessing and said, this boy will go to India, will receive all the teachings from 150 masters. He will bring back to Tibet and he will spread the teachings of the Buddha in the 4 different directions, fearless as a lion itself. And so that was the prophecy. But the prophecy tended to be, how do I say?
Quite a long time.
Quite a long time, you know. So until he was 50 years old, he was a Bempo. And then after that, he became, how do I say, Kadampa practitioner, which is the lineage of the Atisha. You know. So he was, for a while, he was a practitioner of that. And then after a few months and years, then he went, crossed the border through Nepal, he went to India. And then he received teachings from the Niguma, and she is the elder sister of Naropa. So she herself, her guru is Saraha, and as well as a Vajradhara in her ultimate level in terms of connection. And then the other teachers that he had was a Sukhasiddhi, also happened to be another Indian lady. So both of them, they are like a Dakini, enlightened being, and a great practitioner, enlightened being. And then she gave all the teachings of the Shangpa Kagyu. And when you say Shangpa Kagyu, it's a collective, different method of teachings. Like an example, the Shangpa lineage holds the lineage of the Chakasambhara practice, the 5 tantric deities, and as well as the lineage of the 6 Mahakala, and the lineage of the 6 yogas of Sukhasiddhi, and the 6 yogas of Niguma, and as well as the 5 jewels of Niguma. So all these 5 combined is seen as a Shangpa Kagyu. So later on, you know, when he went back to Tibet, and then the way he settled, you know, was the Shang province or region, just like a Gambopa. You know, Gambopa is the name of the mountain, and the hat and replica, you know, like an example, the Tupa Kagyu as a replica of the mountain. You know, so many of the masters, you know, their lineage name is based on where they have spent the time most. But since I was very young, I had not so much ideas about the Shangpa lineage. I was just, you know, going into the monastery and studying. But when I was in the retreat, I opened the text of the Shangpa lineage, master Chungpo Nanjo. And when I read that history, I couldn't hold my tears back. It was like reconnecting to that story. You know, you feel like you know that story. And then I couldn't lie to myself. And from the age of 15, I said to myself, I will dedicate my life fully to the Shangpa lineage. And then when I researched even further, then my predecessor, he did the 3 years retreat in a Shangpa tradition when he was 14 years old, same as me. You know, so and then also he established the 3 years retreat, because previous Kalu Rinpoche, he was the first Vajrayana master who traveled to the West and who have established a 3 years retreat tradition for male and female in the 1970s.
Ahead of his time.
Yes. So I try to continue that legacy, because when you say lineage, it's not so much to do with the bloodline, you know. It's more, you know. So it's more to do with how much you have dedicated fully into the Dharma, and what you have understood, and how you can help other people, you know, genuinely. You know, so that is the essence of the lineage, and that comes down to the practitioner during retreat. You know? So.
And with regard to that, one thing, because Rinpoche, I would like to firstly thank on behalf of the audience for giving us such an elaborate history of how the Shangpa lineage came into being. But one question that I wanted to ask Rinpoche was with regard to the Vajrayana conference, and also the fact that this ancient, if one can call it with love and respect, this ancient wisdom that is Buddhism, how relevant is it to this day and age? Rinpoche did touched upon the fact that Buddhism needs to help people who can't meet their rent, people who are divorced, who are going through depression and all these situations. So if Rinpoche can share something on that regard.
like when you have this so-called lineage,
Yes.
it has a transmission lineage, it has an empowerment lineage. It is very helpful when it comes to a few individuals who really want to dedicate fully and not looking back anything in life and want to practice their whole life.
Yes.
And everything makes sense.
Yes.
But like you said, in order to bring more in a relative level to help other people, is nowadays, people go through depression. And myself, I've gone through a depression with a lot of betrayal in my inner circle, in my early age, when I started the responsibility.
Yes.
Because when you have a name, there's a value. When there's a value, there's a politics.
Yes.
And when there's politics, there's a different interest,
Yes.
people surrounding you. And then when you brought up in a monastery, you don't have a management training,
Yes.
You are told, be good, be kind, be loving,
Yes.
everything will be fine, But when you wake up in the reality after taking the responsibility, it doesn't function like that, You spend a lot of time with a lawyer.
Yes.
You spend a lot of time individual by helping them. Putting a boomba on their head is not going to fix their problem.
Yes.
But certain individual, you have to sit down and listen to them, And I think that is important. And talking about how you can bring the teachings of the Buddha, teachings of the Shangpa lineage in a more relevant level, is by introducing the Niguma Yoga itself. Because when she taught the 5 jewels of Niguma teaching, heat generating practice, clear light practice, dream yoga practice, poa practice, parta practice, When she taught all of the 5 jewels and the 6 yogas of Niguma to Shangpa Kagyu, she said, do not teach any of these things until the 7th generation of the lineage holder.
Yes, I did come across that.
Yes.
For 7th generation, the lineage was supposed to be given to just a single individual.
Exactly. So after the 7th lineage holder, then you can share public. Then that is when the Shangpa lineage became very popular,
Yes.
during that time.
Yes.
And so
the popularity of Shangpa, the flourishing of that, actually happened after the 7th generation.
Yes.
When it was revealed to a bigger audience.
Exactly. So there was a time that where Shangpa Kagyu, because he's a great scholar, meditator, and he was known as the Mahasiddha of Tibet,
Yes.
which is not really the common title that you get, because
At that point in time, for somebody who's Tibetan.
Yes,
Because
exactly.
most of the Panditas and everybody was Indian.
Exactly. So he's known as Pandita and Mahasiddha and Yogi, enlightened being. And there was a time that, he had 108 stupas in the temples and so on. But then there was a certain generation of decline in terms of popularity, but in terms of the lineage, it maintained the blessing, the protection, and from the protector of the Mahakala and the Kandruma as well.
Yes.
And on the 7th lineage holder, it became public. So, talking about the relevant level, is that myself, I practice Niguma Yoga. I know when you go travel around the world and looking after a meditation center, meeting people, and then you go through so many different challenges, and then you have a lot of stress in your mind. You have a lot of, because not every a meditation center is a peaceful place. Every meditation center has a different challenges. Some places are in debt, some places are in the political turmoil, and some Dharma center they're in the kind of division state. So you have to solve that, being patient, and you have to be passive. You have to be kind. At the same time, you have to be decisive.
Yes.
So all that doesn't really work together very well unless you have an inner peace. So when you have an inner peace, and the search of inner peace actually started even further after the retreat, and I started doing this Niguma Yoga,
Yes.
and it has been very, very helpful to me.
Yes.
And then I was doing the yoga every day for almost 1 year, preparation for this event as well. On the top of that,
Yes.
and it helped my mind to be more clear, to be more calm, and also how I interact with my responsibility and with other individuals, And in terms of the Dharma practice, it helped me a lot,
Yes.
So if it can help me, it can help other people.
Yes.
I'm a human being, they're a human being, So my title is just a name. That doesn't, make anybody enlightenment. But if there's a quality development that I have, and if I can share, and help other people, and why not?
Yes.
Because in Indian culture you have a hatha yoga,
Yes.
and many people they explore the hatha yoga, and they do all sorts of yoga, and then after that they seek a spirituality. So if we as a Buddhist, whether I'm a Shangpa lineage or any sort of a lineage, if we can contribute in a physical and a mental well-being for the society, and that itself will hold the tradition and the culture of each nation.
Yes.
Otherwise, having too much concern and being panicking everywhere,
Yes.
and how to modernizing it doesn't really help unless you give them to something to experience by themselves. Because many people, they drink alcohol, they consume many different things to make them feel alive, or they want to switch off. So they have so they have too extreme.
Yes.
So when you give them yoga, you're not telling them to worship me, I'm your guru.
Yes.
You're telling them to experience your own breath. You're telling them to experience your own body. You're telling them to experience their own air,
Yes.
and to be mindful.
Yes.
So when you have that kind of experience to see deeper in oneself, there's definitely a positive help.
Yes.
So.
And I wanted to share with the audience that Rinpoche is presenting the Niguma Yoga in the conference
Yes.
for the wider audience, and I can't wait. I'm very eager, and I've been interested for a long time to find out about what the Niguma Yoga is.
Yes.
And it's fortunate for all of us that the Center for Bhutan and Cross National Happiness Studies is making it, giving Rinpoche this platform wherein you can reach a wider audience, especially here in Bhutan and the rest of the world.
Exactly.
And while I'm being reminded by the producer that we are running out of time.
Okay.
I will also like to ask Rinpoche, because as I was asking Rinpoche about the relevance of Buddhism in this day and age, and the beauty of Rinpoche's style, if I can call it that, style or your approach of teaching, is the fact that you personalize everything and you give the example of yourself, and so much of your dharma and your teaching, what I've comes across as a testimonial of what you yourself have personally gone through. And I think it suffices for the audience and as for me to say that if it works for Rinpoche, it should work for anybody else. But about this secret dharma and who can hear it and who can't hear it, if Rinpoche can share briefly about that, although it's difficult for me to first of all ask this question, and secondly to even attach the fact to share it briefly.
There's no such thing as secret, it's just the idea of the secrecy is that other people may misunderstood. That is the core point.
Yes.
Other people may misunderstood this method of visualization, this method of practice. Like an example, can you control all the pictures of the Vajrakilaya that is surfacing on the internet?
Yes.
You can't. It's already past that line.
Yes.
Your argument is true at a certain period of time, but it is irrelevant to the world that we live in, because everything we communicate, everything we share, everything is in social media.
Yes.
So like an example, all the deities that we see, all the pictures, first of all, it should never be known by general public in the first place.
To begin with.
Yeah, to begin with,
Yes.
let alone talk about it. But starting with His Holiness Dalai Lama, and he gives the Kala Chakra, the highest Tantra teachings and empowerment. And then, as long as you have a pure intention, and if the person who's learning has a pure intention, all is good. And if you have a negative intention, even I give you a piece of, teachings, it is still incorrect. Yes. So I think that sort of a mindset is very important. If you have a pure intention, you're not going to misuse it.
Yes.
You're not going to misrepresent. You're not going to take advantage of other people. You're not going to bring that in an abuse of power to manipulate or influence other people for your own self-interest.
Yes.
You will practice it for your own benefit, and based upon your own realization, you will benefit other people along your journey in life. So idea of the secrecy is not really important.
Yes.
But the way it is introduced, the way it is practiced has to be understood very clearly.